Blog Talk Radio.
Radio, and today we have our co-host Tim Williams, an ordained minister through the United Christian Fellowship Church. He works mostly in the praise and worship ministry, working with the Porterville Church of God, and he's an awesome musician. In fact, he's responsible for that intro song we just listened to. And tonight we are talking about Monsanto, the Georgia Guidestones, and the Global Seed Vault. And you're probably wondering, what could those three things possibly have to do with each other? Right, Tim?
Yeah, good question.
Okay, well, this is how I read into it. Monsanto was originally a company dedicated to creating mostly like herbicides, DDT, PCBs, and stuff like that, stuff that kill pests and undesirable weeds. And they developed a pesticide called Roundup. You might have heard of that. Roundup, most people use it around the house to kill weeds. And once they developed the Roundup product, they decided, well, we need to come up with a plant that will not get killed by Roundup so that we can spray Roundup on an entire field and not kill the desired plant. So what they did, they went into the bioengineering genetics lab and came up with a way to bombard seedlings with a protein or nucleotide or a strand of RNA or DNA, which was produced by a bacterium, which had the property of conferring onto that organism the resistance to that chemical, the Roundup chemical. And they were successful. They created a Roundup-resistant strain of corn and soy plants. And so they decided, okay, well, now we need to patent these soybeans so that when we sell them to people, they have to pay us for them. You kind of like when you buy a software program from a software company and you have to pay an annual maintenance fee. Well, the same thing goes with their genetically modified food. When you buy a seed type from Monsanto, you are not allowed to take those seeds that are the new seeds produced by that crop and save them for the next year and plant them. That's against the law. Did you know that?
Yeah, and they even go farther than that. They've had suits where the seeds have blown accidentally into a neighboring farm's field and grown, and they sued them for copyright infringement.
Improving agriculture, improving lives. This is the motto of Monsanto, the ag giant who's the world's second largest producer of genetically modified seeds. The company that's come under scrutiny with their battle against small farmers, suing over 144 of them for patent infringement. To combat the corporation, farmers have attempted to fight back. Last year, 270,000 small farmers tried to sue Monsanto for their seedy practices, but a district judge dismissed the lawsuit. Now, 5 million Brazilian farmers are suing the company, saying that Monsanto collects unfair annual royalties for renewal harvests of their seeds. To explain more about the lawsuit and what's next for the battle of small farmers against Monsanto, I'm joined by Shelley Roche from BuyStyle.tv. Hey, Shelley, can you talk a little bit more about this lawsuit? I mean, 5 million farmers is a lot.
Yeah, that's a huge number. It's really unprecedented as far as Monsanto is concerned. And basically the lawsuit is that once a farmer buys Monsanto's patented seed, they have to pay an annual royalty fee that essentially goes on forever. So they have no way out once they've bought the seed. This actually violates the Brazilian Cultivars Act, which gives farmers the legal right to multiply any seeds that they buy.
And is this happening in any other country where people are fighting back against this specific policy of the renewal? I know that there's patent infringement lawsuits from Monsanto, and I know that people are fighting just the GM seeds, but is there any other lawsuits that compare to this?
Well, this is actually the first of this scale that we're seeing. There have certainly been numerous lawsuits because this policy of Monsanto's is just it's been so carefully and successfully designed that, once they get a farmer sucked into using their seeds and their herbicide and their pesticide, that farmer is essentially a customer for life, whether they want to be or not. And it becomes a devastating cycle. So this has certainly come up in many countries, but it's very hard for small farmers to band together to the extent that we're seeing in Brazil.
Why Brazil, Shelley? Why 5 million farmers in Brazil? What is going on there?
Well, GMOs were originally introduced to Brazil illegally, and once they became illegal, they became very popular very quickly, to the point where 85% of Brazilian soy is now genetically engineered. So it's really, it's a huge crop for them. It's one of their big profits for farming. And so it's really, we have a large concentration of farmers, and they've been able to really organize and get this going.
And do you think the case is more symbolic at this point? I mean, I know that there were 270,000 farmers who attempted to sue Monsanto and the case got dropped. What do you think is going to happen with this? Is there really a chance to succeed here?
Well, they've already won, in court, but that's really just the start of the battle. Monsanto has demonstrated time and time again that they have the resources, they have the connections to squash any sort of opposition. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they counteract this, and how successful they are. I think that the scale that we're looking at again is really going to differentiate this case from others of its kind, but it's still going to be an uphill battle.
Shelley, it seems like a lot of countries in the world are very aware of the issue of genetically modified seeds, of crops, and I know that there were organic farmers here that obviously know about it because Monsanto's gone after them. But I mean, why do you think the majority of Americans would you say that they're blissfully unaware of the subject?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been estimated that up to 75% of an American's daily diet is genetically modified. And no, people just don't know. We don't have any sort of labeling that happens. And if you look at the origins of when GMOs came to the market, in the early 90s, the FDA established a no testing policy for genetically modified foods on the grounds that they were substantially equivalent to unmodified foods and therefore perfectly safe. So this then enabled Monsanto and these other companies to basically just flood the market with their products without any sort of differentiation or testing. So now we're in a situation where nearly all of the foods that you buy at the grocery store have some sort of modified product in them, and there's really no way to tell which have been modified and which haven't.
Interesting. Yeah, as we know, I mean, corn syrup is pretty much in almost everything. I wanted to read you something. You were just talking about the FDA, and I wanted to read you a quote actually from Phil Angel, Director of Corporate Communications for Monsanto. He says, Monsanto should not have to vouch for the safety of biotech food. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job. But Shelley, I mean, Michael Taylor, the former vice president of Monsanto, is the head advisor at the FDA. What can we do when there's such a revolving door between this corporation and the regulatory bodies?
Yeah, I mean, this is disgraceful. It's outrageous what's happened. If back in the early 90s, Michael Taylor was responsible for crafting the FDA's GMO policy, and we've seen since then dozens of internal memos that have been leaked that reveal the FDA scientists were actually very concerned about the human health and environmental implications of GMOs, and did not consider them in any way equivalent or safe. So, you can see that science was not really a factor in the FDA's GMO policy. And now Michael Taylor, the man who was responsible for that, subsequently went back to Monsanto and now enjoys a position as food safety czar.
Is it different here in America than any other country? It seems like a lot of European countries have either banned them or at least labeled them. And we just saw Poland, the bee protest, saying that Monsanto's GM maize is killing the bees. I mean, what do you think is the problem here? Is there just an insane amount of lobbying to this government?
There is. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge problem where there's government collusion with Monsanto and these other companies. So these big biotech firms are, in essence, crafting the policy that gives them competitive advantage and really precludes any sort of competition, new companies from entering the market. And so it makes the public demand less likely to have any effect, because Monsanto doesn't have to do what the public wants. If you look at the research, one in 4 Americans thinks that GMOs are essentially safe, and over half of people who have been polled say that they would not buy a food that they know to be genetically modified. So if you look at what the people want and what the people are getting, it's two different things. And there's one reason for that, and it's because these companies have basically run amok within our government and crafted all of these policies.
Shelley, I wanted you to go back to the seed renewal process, how people are mandated to buy new seeds every year. What do you think is going to happen, though? I mean, we already know that there's super weeds and now super bugs that are resistant to the BT crops and also the pesticides. So what do you think Monsanto is going to do when they no longer work?
Oh, well, they're already developing stronger, more toxic pesticides and herbicides. And so this is, again, part of that devastating cycle that the farmer gets trapped in. They make a huge investment. They invest in all of this Monsanto technology. Their first crop is great. And then every subsequent crop, they start getting these resistant superweeds. The bugs come in. And then they've got to buy more pesticide, more herbicide. And then they have to start applying more toxic herbicide and pesticide. And pretty soon, you can see where this is going.
I wanted just to quickly wrap up this segment, talk about the Terminator seed, Monsanto's seed that will actually destroy itself after one yield. That almost sounds like a weapon. I mean, I don't know. Why do you think that they would need to produce something like that?
Yeah, it's really scary, actually, that technology, because once it gets released into the wild and it cross-pollinates and contamination occurs, which we've seen with all of their products, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen when a bird eats a seed that's been treated with the Terminator gene. And the obvious reason for them to create that is so that they can force farmers to buy new seeds every year. So it's highly profitable for them. But it's also incredibly dangerous technology that we really don't want.
It is very interesting, and we'll definitely have you on again to talk more about this. Thanks so much, Shelley. That was Shelley Roche from BioStyle TV.
Mm-hmm. And the other question that it raises, before we get too far off, is, they've discovered seeds that were still viable in 4,000-year-old tombs in Egypt and stuff. And, they took some of them and grew them, and they look like little spindly plants. But as they analyzed them, enough, a handful of seeds, in one hand provided enough nutrition to actually live on, a couple of handfuls a day. You could live on that. There was actually nutrients in that. And we bioengineered this stuff so that it be resistant to, as you're talking now, Roundup. I used an orange grove. I've used Roundup in all kind of sprays. they bioengineer corn so that it's 12 feet tall and it puts out 5 times the amount of corn per bushels per acre, but you have to eat 10 times as much wheat or corn or anything to get the same nutrient value. We're into this thing of it looks real great, but it's absolutely worthless. And now we're into, as we left off here, controlling it so people can't grow it. So we're into only big business can grow food and ultimately control the food source.
Yeah, right. And like you implied earlier, I thought you were going to touch on the concept of cross-pollination. In Brazil, they have an insanely wide variety of corn crops, different strains of corn. And what they have discovered is that virtually all of those indigenous corn crops have been cross-pollinated and contaminated, and their now growing offspring are in part genetically modified organisms, which is kind of strange because they don't generally need to use GMO crops over there. They do things naturally, but people are speculating that, the underhanded nature of that company, they probably flew in with little Cessnas and dropped pollen from, GMO crops onto the plants, knowing that this would happen, because it's kind of like if you could make a seed which grew money,
right,
and spread it all over the world and have that money programmed to come back to you, that's kind of like what they're doing, because like you said, when the farmer's neighbor's crops get cross-pollinated with these GMOs, and then Monsanto says, hey, you guys stole our genetic patent right, and we're going to sue you. Well, they can do this like globally, and for some crazy reason, the powers that be, the lawmakers, says that that's okay, and somehow that's justifiable, which is totally insane. I cannot believe that there's not a lawmaker out there with enough scruples to see that as inherently wrong and evil. Anyway.
Yeah, well, we're talking about global. You use the terms global and lawmakers, and I know you threw at me a term that I hadn't heard before, of the Codex Alimentarius laws.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're looking at a global enforcement of food. And, I mean, they've done stuff where they've virtually, we have laws in effect since 2009 here. I haven't really seen them implemented, but they're in place that vitamins could become illegal.
Yes,
illegal
exactly.
house.
Mm-hmm. They tried to do that in Germany. They tried to make herbs and vitamins illegal, and you had to have a prescription to buy herbs or vitamins. But
Right.
the citizens threw a big fit. I mean, they basically approved the bill. They were going to pass it and enforce it. And the citizens of Germany said that's total BS. They made a big stink about it, and so now it's kind of on the back burner. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
The thing is they took it from Germany, and I guess it was a original thing that was written or somewhere around World War I. They escalated it in Germany, but they've actually sold it to and it's enforced by the World Trade Commission through the United Nations, and they've actually got it in place globally. Now, people throw fits, but it's in place. And to tie this into Monsanto, in that, they've actually legalized 7 of the 9 worst, totally globally ban pesticides, and they made them legal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they were banned in 176 different countries, including the USA, banned these chemicals. They're called POPs, persistent
Right.
organic pollutants, because they're so bad that they're so obviously carcinogenic and they kill people that they banned them in 176 countries. And then all of a sudden, Codex Alimentarius, what you were just talking about, comes up, which a lot of people are under the false impression that that's sort of a health organization. It's not. It's a trade organization. It's designed to help people involved in trafficking, these products with these toxic chemicals in them. So the Codex Alimentarius people have approved, like you said, 7 out of the 9 worst toxins that you could possibly have. And you know what that means? That means when a foreign country ships you their produce, if you detect that toxic chemical on that produce, you are not allowed to turn that produce away and tell them to take it back to their country, because it's a violation of trade law.
Let me tell you about Codex Alimentarius. Let me define it for you. Let me help you understand the enemy. And let me assure you that absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. And it's a great deal of it is documented on my website, which is www.healthfreedomusa, one word, healthfreedomusa.org. Let me back up and tell you that I've been watching Codex come toward us for about the last decade. And I've been watching the votes in Congress, which, God help us, is our bastion of support and protection against Codex, and I'll explain why that is. I've been watching the votes to protect our health freedom dwindle until finally in the 109th Congress, without a good deal of activity, we didn't have the votes to protect us. I've been watching Codex accelerate, and I've been watching it expand, and I've been getting more and more troubled. Let me give you a brief rundown of Codex then. After the Second World War, the Nuremberg tribunals were held, in which people who had committed crimes against humanity were judged by the world community in a court run by the United States and Britain, and they were sentenced to terms in prison if they were found guilty of crimes against humanity. One of the people found guilty of crimes against humanity was the president of a huge industrial megalith called IG Farben. IG Farben produced the gas used in the gas chambers, Cyclone B. They produced the steel for the death camps and the railroad lines. They produced the munitions, they produced chemicals, they produced all kinds of stuff. They produced pharmaceuticals. Big pharmaceutical company. So the president of IG Farben was convicted of crimes against humanity. Now, he's a sort of artistic fellow and creative. He was the one who was responsible for the slogan that people saw as they entered Auschwitz, usually for the last time. Arbeit macht frei. Work brings freedom. Creative sort of fellow. So he was sitting in jail and he said, well, that didn't work. What else can we do? I've got it. Food. He who controls food controls the world. So when he got out of jail, he went to his UN buddies and he said, have I got an idea for you? If we take over food worldwide, we have power worldwide. And his UN buddies said, cool idea. And so they created a trade commission. That's a very important pair of words, a trade commission called the Codex Alimentarius Commission. It is not a public health commission. It is not a consumer protection commission. It is a trade commission. Trade is about what? Money. Business. Trade is about profit. Well, they said in 1962, We're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. Long term. And they set up a bunch of committees on fish and fishery, fats and oil, fruits and vegetables, ground nuts, nutrition and foods for special dietary uses, and so on. There are currently about 27 Codex Committee. There are regional organizations, there are task forces, and so on. So it's a huge bureaucratic monstrosity. It's immense. Codex has promulgated well over 4,000 guidelines, standards, and regulations on everything which can legally be put into your mouth, with the exception of pharmaceuticals. They are not part of Codex. Important. Now, Codex standards have no legal weight whatsoever. Zero. So who cares about them? They're just standards. So we're talking about an industry-dominated, regulation-setting organization. But if it has no legal standing, who cares, right? Here's the history of Codex Alimentarius before 1962. The Austro-Hungarian Empire said, we need rules by which the courts can rule on cases involving food. So we'll have regulations and rules that the courts will enforce. That's how they get their weight. That was called the Codex Alimentarius, and it was put into place around 1893 and lasted until the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the First World War. So the idea was there in the Germanic tradition. We need rules, lots of rules, lots and lots of rules. We need a lot of rules. Let's have rules for everything to do with food. So it was sort of a natural extension for the German industrialists to say, we'll go back to the good old days of Codex Alimentarius, back when we had them in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Cool. So they started promulgating their rules and regulations, and they were voluntary. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. And that's very interesting because they're supposed to be about health and food worldwide. Some conflicts of interest that we'll talk about. So Codex started promulgating regulations and rules, and the way that's done is that the committees work up a rule, a standard, a guideline, a regulation, and then they get it to what's called Step 8, which is the final step in their administrative process, and then it's presented to the Codex Alimentarius Commission for ratification, like the vitamin and mineral guideline was presented to the Codex Alimentarius Commission on July 4th this past summer. It was ratified, it was approved by consensus, and it is now, despite the propaganda that you're going to hear, if you ever hear about it in the media, it is now mandatory upon any member country of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Well, what in the world do they have to do with it? And the answer is everything. The World Trade Organization, you see, accepted Codex when the World Trade Organization was formed in 1994. Okay? They said, well, how are we going to decide trade disputes around food if we don't have a set of rules? I know. We'll accept the Codex Alimentarius rules. And all the members of the WTO worldwide will, get ready for an Orwellian term, harmonize with our standards, with the Codex standards. Harmonize. I suggest you capitalize the first 4 letters in your mind. So everybody's supposed to harmonize with Codex. And when they harmonize with Codex, then if they get pulled into the World Trade Organization dispute resolution process, they have a chance of winning. Because, here's the kicker. You ready for this one? If 2 countries go into the World Trade Organization dispute resolution process, and one of them is Codex compliant, and one of them is not Codex compliant, The one that is Codex compliant automatically wins regardless of the merit of the case. People are using Codex compliance as a weapon in a much bigger economic battle. So, every country in the world is racing to do what? To become Codex compliant. So, in the United States, the situation is, okay, how do we become Codex compliant when we have laws that protect us? And you have to remember that Codex does not serve consumer well-being, does not serve health. It serves what I call the 5 bigs. Big pharma, big chema, big biotechna, big agribiz, and big medica. Little you and little me are not served by Codex in the least. So, before we go forward and talk about the rest of what has to happen, let's ask what Codex does. You probably all know about the vitamin and mineral guideline that was ratified on July 4th. You may not know that although it is said that Codex guidelines, regulations, and standards which have been ratified are voluntary, they are not voluntary. That is known as a lie. They are mandatory, but they are not fully mandatory until December 31st, 2009. They're sort of kind of a little bit mandatory now, and they're totally mandatory then. Okay, so what does Codex do? Why do I care enough about Codex to close my practice and stop treating patients who came to me from around the world to help them regain their health and be radiantly well with non-toxic means, which is a very satisfying thing to do. I love it. And it also provided me with an income. That was nice. Why am I concerned enough? Okay, let's talk about the vitamin and mineral guideline first. In 1994, here in the United States, DSHEA, the Dietary Supplements, Health and Education Act, was passed, which classifies nutrients and herbs as foods. As foods, you can set no upper limit on them. You cannot set an upper limit on lettuce, lamb, or rutabagas, and similarly, you cannot set an upper limit on vitamin C, echinacea, ginkgo biloba, vitamin D. And access to nutrients is freely given to us. We are allowed to have any nutrients we want because, and this is a very important point, under common law, anything not forbidden is permitted. Codex, on the other hand, is a Napoleonic Code law system. Under Napoleonic Code, anything not permitted is forbidden. That's called a positive list. So, vitamins and minerals. In 1994, we passed DSHEA. Nutrients are foods. We can have as much of them as we want. It's our business. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Dangerous industrial poisons. As poisons, we have to be protected from them. How do you protect somebody from a poison? You use toxicology. You use a science called risk assessment. A quick primer on risk assessment. First, you take the substance that's poisonous and you feed it to animals and you determine the dose that kills 50% of them. That's called the LD50. Okay? And you extrapolate what the LD50 for a human being might be. Then, you go down to the other end of the dosage range and you start feeding itty-bitty tiny bits of it to test animals. And you come up with the largest possible dose, the maximum permissible upper limit, that can be fed to an animal before a discernible impact is shown. Okay? No discernible impact. Then you divide that by 100. That's how they do it in risk assessment. And now you've got a safety margin. So you've got 1/100th of the dose that can be given, the largest dose that can be given with no discernible impact. Okay? Nutrients under Codex not only are limited to those nutrients on the positive list, and we anticipate there will be 18 of them, and they do not include CoQ10, glucosamine, chondroitin sulfate. They do include fluoride, which, to my knowledge as a physician, has absolutely no biological benefit whatsoever. But it does make people complacent. Fluoride was first used in the Gulag because it was discovered that prisoners who were fed fluoridated water were complacent, and you could do anything you wanted to them. They were easy to manage. So you have 18 nutrients. You have itty-bitty, teeny-weeny, little-bitty doses that are determined scientifically to have no effect on any human being. Now, in this country, we have a problem. We have déchets. We got to get rid of déchets in order to harmonize with Codex. That part of Codex, anyway. So how do we get rid of déchets? We attack it legislatively, of course. And there are 5, count them, 5 bills currently before Congress designed to overturn, gut, invalidate, and otherwise get rid of déchet. Because once déchet is gone, we can harmonize with a vitamin and mineral guideline. So what we're talking about is waking up one morning and being very surprised to find that high-potency, therapeutically effective, clinically significant nutrients are now illegal in the way that heroin is illegal. Not available with a prescription, illegal. If these nutrients have any impact on the human body, they are illegal. That's just the vitamin and mineral guideline. Let's talk about milk. We have recombinant bovine growth hormone, and now we can choose milk with it or milk without it, butter with it, butter without it, right? Not under Codex, because under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet, whether it has fins, feet, or feathers, every animal on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics. Must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. Codex requires, mandates that all food be irradiated unless it's eaten locally and raw. All food, including organic food, of course. So is it organic afterwards? Well, of course, the organic standards are incredibly low. The organic standards allow a farmer to use veterinary drugs, including growth hormones, antibiotics, etc., on animals, and then at his whim reclassify them as organic. But farmers are our friends, and they would never do that, right? Right. Codex sets limits for the dangerous industrial chemicals that you can have in your food. And the limits are incredibly high. Go to Codex Alimentarius, do a Google search, and look, there are drop-down menus at the top of the official Codex page. Look at the toxins and the veterinary chemicals and the levels that are set. They are terrifying to me, terrifying. The names of the chemicals that are permitted and the amounts of the chemicals that are permitted are terrifying to me. Why am I terrified? Well, perhaps I'm just a cowardly person. It's possible. Think about this. In 2001, 176 countries, including the United States, got together and they said there are 12 really bad organic chemicals. They're called POPs, persistent organic pollutants. There are a lot of them, But there are 12 that are so bad that nobody could disagree that those 12 POPs had to be banned worldwide. 9 of the 12 worst organic chemicals known are pesticides, not surprisingly, because they kill things. And of course, we have many processes and enzyme systems that are very much like insects and other pests, so they're not too good for us. But Codex has different ideas. Codex has brought back 7 of the 9 forbidden POPs that 176 countries banned worldwide. Dieldrin, aldrin, hexachlorobenzene. And the food that is imported from other countries that contains these substances cannot be stopped at our borders, because otherwise it would be, God forbid, a trade violation. That's how Codex works. Codex, according to the World Trade Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization joint projections. Now, I didn't make this up. Please, if you unfastened your intellectual seatbelts, put them back on again. If you do the numbers in the WHO-FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, because what do I know? They estimate, they're the experts, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths, 1 billion through simple starvation. Those folks who die are not particularly economically successful from the point of view of the corporations. When you're starving to death, how much good can you do when the issue is how much can you buy? Not a lot. Forget them. But the next 2 billion, they will die from the preventable diseases of undernutrition. Cancer, the single most profitable condition ever known to humankind. Cardiovascular disease, a good second. Diabetes, pretty good producer. And a whole host of other preventable diseases. Who will die? Who knows? Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients. That's who will live. You and I? Probably not. Our children? Probably not. Our grandchildren? Probably not. So we're talking about food regulations that are in fact the legalization of mandated toxicity and undernutrition. It will be illegal if there's a famine in, wherever there's a famine, to ship high nutrient density biscuits to that country, and it will be illegal to distribute them. That's what we're talking about. Codex is big and it's bad, but it's not invulnerable. So the point is that we have to protect ourselves, and I believe that we have to regain global leadership, which we have lost, surrendered, squandered, sold. No global.
No, we have.
We have sold. Just joining the World Trade Organization surrendered our sovereignty. However, parenthetically, I have a team of constitutional lawyers looking at the following question: are we members of the WTO? Because if you remember from high school civics, the way you get a treaty to be a real treaty is to have it ratified by a 2/3 majority of the Senate. And the way we got into the WTO was they passed a law allowing Bill Clinton to fast-track us into the WTO. That's not a treaty. We are not in the WTO. All right. Now, that's a piece of the battle.
Tell George.
We will tell George, but I don't think he's going to be relevant by the time we tell him. So that's a piece of it, but that's not going to save our lives right now, because do you know, picture in your mind a wasp or a bee trap where the insect voluntarily goes down the funnel and then can't get up out of the trap again? That's Codex. A regular law can be overturned, it can be repealed, it can be corrected by another piece of legislation. But once we become Codex compliant in any area, as long as we're members of the WTO, it can never be repealed because we have lost the sovereignty to become un-Codex compliant as long as we're in the WTO. So it's like going down that funnel and not being able to get up out of it. So it's very important that we make sure that we do not become Codex compliant. But then we'll be hit with all those big trade sanctions and the country will be destroyed economically, right? No. Remember surprise? One of the principles of war? Remember mass, where you take your strength and put it against the enemy's weakness? Well, here's what we've done. We have a team of lawyers who have spent hundreds of hours with us pro bono. These are good guy lawyers. These two gentlemen and we have spent hundreds of hours studying Codex, understanding its weaknesses, a lot of weaknesses, and constructing a strategy which will take the sucker down. It will take it down. But I need you. You are people that other people come to for information about safe, healthy food and nutrients. You are ready-made dissemination points. You are the 1,000 million, 100 million points of light. Here's what is happening. Every country in the world has to be Codex compliant in order not to get hit by WTO trade sanctions, as I told you, if they're members of Codex in the WTO. And there are a few countries that are not, but I guarantee you they're not of any major significance. So, the question is, what does Codex compliance mean? Well, most people, most countries, most legislators believe that it means they have to adopt as their national standard on that particular subject what Codex ratified. But that's not the case any more than we're in the WTO. That's not the case either. What it means is that the format, the issues, and the subjects covered by a Codex guideline, standard, or regulation have to be addressed in the country's guideline, standard, or regulation on the same topic. So, what we have done is create the first of many alternative Codex guidelines. You can go to our website, www.healthfreedomusa.org, and you will see a little button on the upper right-hand side that says, Sign the Citizens' Petition. Now, to briefly digress, a citizen's petition is not like a grocery store petition that you sign and you bring to somebody and you say, I have 200,000 signatures, and they dump it in the wastebasket, because in their mind, it's one signature, you and your friends wrote 200,000 names. No, it is a legal challenge to the policy of the United States government on Codex. It's called a citizen's petition. It's a legal challenge. We're suing the United States government, saying what you're doing is illegal, folks. Let us tell you how. We want hearings of fact. We want redress. We want correction. If we get what we want, that's dandy. If we don't get what we want, we have gone through a process called exhausting administrative remedies. We have made the case ripe for court. Okay, so I need you and everybody you know to sign the citizens' petition saying this is a bad policy, en masse. And you do this on the web, and you'll see the instructions, and we present the thousands and thousands and thousands of actual physical pages that we print out with people's signatures to the U.S. Codex Office and to the FDA, and they don't like that at all. But that's okay. However, this time, this is the Second Amendment of the Citizens Petition that we're asking you to sign. This time, the revised vitamin and mineral guideline is part of it. It's part of the lawsuit saying this needs to be U.S. policy. The more voices that say, this is what I want, and you work for me, Mr. and Mrs. Bureaucrat and Mr. and Mrs. Congressman, Mr. and Mrs. Senator, the more voices, the more weight. So step number one is read and sign the citizens' petition. Step number two is disseminate the information, the web link. Tell everybody you know. Put it out in your office. Get your patients, your friends, your neighbors, your suppliers to sign the citizens' petition. And your suppliers, the companies that you use, are going to tell you that you're out of your minds. They will tell you that Codex is not a problem. And they will tell you, anybody here have a dog? Okay. Dog owners know that you ask a dog to heel, sit, down, stay. That's Codex in this country and worldwide. Because the more people who are in Codex coma, the less trouble they have getting this through. So the NNFA, anybody here ever heard of the NNFA? Everybody's heard of the NNFA. Did you know that the members of the NNFA are not just health food stores and manufacturers, but include companies with names you may have heard? Pfizer, Merck, Monsanto, Bayer, BASF, Archer Daniels Midland, Chemet, Eastman Chemical, I could go on, GlaxoSmithKline Wellcome, Wyeth Arrest, you get the idea. Why? Because after DSHEA was passed and the nutrient business burgeoned, the pharmaceutical folks said, and they're not dumb, said there's gold in them thar pills. And they bought the means of production of many, many, many companies, and they bought the companies themselves. So they're in the nutrient business. What better way to kill the nutrient business, which is not nearly as profitable as the toxic chemical drug business, than to take it over? Works every time, right? CRN. Anybody here know about CRN? Council for Responsible Nutrition. Same members. They have lots of multi-level marketing companies. Same members. Okay? And they're serving their members' needs. They're saying, CRN is saying, yay, Codex is coming. It's going to protect us from those dangerous vitamins and minerals and herbs. And CRN is saying, it's fine. Go to sleep, lullaby, and good night. Everything's fine. And they use a report that they commissioned at a reputed cost of $800,000. A report, Sidley, Austin, Brown, and Root, a law firm in Washington, wrote a report for them. And it said, lullaby, and good night. Everything's fine. It won't have an impact on the United States. Everything's fine. Sidley, Austin, Brown, and Root has one major client whose name you might know, Merck. Now, it's entirely possible that NNFA just did a spectacularly bad job of due diligence, or not. Anyway, the report says everything's fine, everything's dandy, no problem, we've got DSHEA. Yeah, sure we do. Now let's talk about Australia. Remember, 5 laws before Congress to overturn DSHEA. And you can write to Congress on the website. The click of a mouse. I call it riding the freedom mouse.
It's called security.
Now, Congress uses a multiplier of 13,000 to 1. Every email, fax, phone call, letter. Don't write letters. They get decontaminated. They never get to Congress. Every email, fax, and phone call counts as 13,000 constituent opinions. They figure that if you write a letter or send an email, there are 12,999 lazy lunks who can't bother to get to the computer terminal to do the same thing, but they feel the way you do. Interesting. That's power, my friends. That's power. That's 13,000 to 1. So suppose we have 1 million people. Suppose we have 10 million people. Suppose we have 100 million people saying, don't you dare. Now, Congress has one rule above all others. Anybody know what it is? Get reelected. That's the primary rule, the prime directive, as Isaac Asimov would have called it. The prime directive is to get reelected. Now, DeShay was passed, you may remember, by unanimous congressional consent. Was that because one morning all members of Congress woke up and said, I see the light. Nutrients are better than drugs. No, they said, oh, if I don't go along with this, I'll never be reelected to anything. You remember critical mass. Remember, we were out on the streets and we were up on our hind legs and we were making noise and we were rallying and we were writing letters and we said, don't you dare take away my health freedom. Remember? And we won. Except we got fat, dumb, and lazy and stopped protecting ourselves. So now we're in the same place again. Except it's all food instead of just nutrients. So that's point number 1. Use the freedom mouse. Ride the freedom mouse. We've made it as easy as possible on the site. Sign up for the emails. I will never sell your information to anyone, I promise. I will never rent it. I will never share it. You'll only get email from me. And we need you to know what's going on. So I'll send you email blasts. I'll send you things that you can do. Or not. You know, it's your choice. Get everybody you know informed. Now, what else can you do? Well, we're going to write a series of Codex alternative guidelines. Everything bad in Codex will have an alternative guideline that turns it into a pro-health guideline. What have we done with the guideline, the vitamin and mineral guideline? You can see that because we have a markup copy that has their guideline crossed out and ours written in on the website. It's right there. What we've done is turn it into something, into a guideline that mandates biochemically, individually determined optimal health. And it's still Codex compliant. So we said, okay, now we need Congress to adopt this. And we need other countries in the world to adopt this. So Bert and I went to Washington, D.C., and we met with Dana Rohrabacher from Orange County, who said to us, he's a representative, he said, I believe in pesticides. I went, ugh. He said, I believe in GMOs. I went, ugh, ugh. He said, I believe in irradiation of food. I went, ugh, ugh, ugh. But, he said, I believe in your right to not be forced to eat foods that have been processed that way more than I believe in those technologies. I will take this on. We said, oh, that's really nice. And he said, now, we need a coalition. So we went across the aisle, or across the office building, to see Peter DeFazio's staff from Oregon, who is a liberal Democrat, whereas Rohrabacher is a Republican, a libertarian Republican. And DeFazio's on board. And we have large numbers of others who actually never heard of Codex before we told them about it. Never heard of Codex. We have called every health legislative aide in Congress, and we have said, what's your congressman's position on Codex? And they've said, bah. We have spoken to the trade legislative assistants. We've said, what's your congressman's position on Codex? And they've said, on what? They don't know. We had a congressional briefing set up on the 20th of September. I was going to address Congress, tell them about it. I thought that was cool. 10 days before, it became a briefing on something else. Another freedom click. You need to write to Congress on the site and tell them that they need a congressional briefing, by God, and tell them you want me to brief them. They don't know. They've never heard of it any more than the general public has heard of it. Gee, how'd that happen? Who knows? Every negative part of Codex can be overturned by a guideline, a regulation, or a standard that is positive. So we need your help, because the United States leadership in this guideline and all the positive guidelines to follow is what's going to literally save the population of the planet and save your jobs and your children and your families and mine. Thank you.
Yeah. I used to work for FMC Food Machines, and I live, here in the Central Valley, and I had oranges, and I worked for that company that processes a lot of fruit, primarily oranges. And the job I had was they would call me when they were going to ship or process food to go to a specific country. And I went and had to make sure that their machines were in compliance with the insecticide or whatever coatings they use, the sterilants, any type of coating they use. And there was numerous different antifungal and that type of coatings for every country. So I had to go and calibrate their machines so that they could go into that country. And basically what we're talking about is a country now loses the right to get food processed the way they want it.
Another big group, the World Health Organization, they create these big global operations like the United Nations, and where everybody's united. Oh, joy, joy, love, peace, and harmony, you're thinking. And the World Health Organization and Codex Alimentarius, which kind of has sort of somehow implies alimentary canal, nutrition, health. And it's all doing the exact opposite. In fact, the World Health Organization is on record supporting the concept of depopulation. They are dedicated to population reduction at unimaginary levels.
Well, talk about that. I think one of the things you mentioned was the stone?
The Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah, isn't that what that's dedicated to? I mean, I know very little about it, so here's your chance to tell me all about it. It's my understanding stops that they're dedicated to reducing and maintaining a low world population. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's their first objective. The Georgia Guidestones is a monument similar to Stonehenge that was erected in the U.S. I'm not sure what year, but it wasn't that long ago. And it has, in 7 different languages, it states the objective of the New World Order, which is to, number 1, to maintain a population of 500 million people or less in perfect balance with nature. Now, obviously, our population currently standing at about 7 billion, so that's a big, huge undertaking for those involved in depopulation. How in the world are you going to get rid of 95% people?
One of the comments I heard of the Codex Alimentarius was that if it were actually put fully into effect, it would immediately eliminate close to 3 billion people through nutrition deprivement, just literally starve people to death.
Yeah,
that was a doctor's comment I heard, talking at a conference. So,
now, does this imply that although people would have access to food, the food would be so lacking in nutrition that they would literally starve in spite of the fact that they were eating this crap, this stuff?
Well, basically, the person I heard speaking put it this way: the enforcement of that codex, the vitamins and nutrients you couldn't. They're testing for the qualifying, for allowing or permitting a vitamin or a nutrient was set up. I can't repeat all they said, but it was set up that basically one of the rules in it, if it had any measurable effect on a human being, then it was illegal. So in other words, any nutrient or vitamin that was useful and effective was illegal. To test a vitamin or a nutrient, first of all, to see the harmful effects, you take experimental animals and you feed them massive doses to see how much it takes to actually harm them. Okay, that's your upper limit. Then you feed micro levels to see how little, from the bottom up until it actually has an effect. Okay, so now you have the from the bottom up till it, you feed micro little bits until now you see an effect, and then you divide that by 100. So in other words, the effective dose is 1/100th of something that would actually be effective for you. Is that clear?
Yeah.
That's our calculation. So in other words, it's like saying it takes 10 gallons of gas to drive from here to there, so you can have 1/10 of a gallon. It doesn't do you any good.
Right. Yeah, so in spite of the fact you're getting theoretically what seems to you like enough food, it has no nutritional value. And since now vitamins are illegal, you can't supplement your food with vitamins because you're breaking some kind of crazy law.
Right, and you apply that to food. Well, we send food to countries, but now you can't. Under that, if that were in effect, and like I say, it is in place. People shouted when they tried it, but it's in place. So we're talking about a one world government, one world religion controlling the world. All these little pieces are in place. So you get, let's be real far-fetched, an antichrist in, and he says, no, we're gonna enforce that. We enforce that. We enforce that. We enforce that. And who supports him? Monsanto and all the fat cats that think they're going to be above it until they hand him the reins, and then he turns on them too. I kind of went back into our favorite topic of the one world order, but that's how I see it evolving.
Yeah. You know what I see? You know where I see the global seed bank playing a huge role in this is in their projected recovery period. So say the New World Order types, that 500 million group of people, which includes the ridiculously wealthy Rothschild types.
Right.
Say they succeed and they are able to eliminate 95% of the population by feeding everybody genetically modified food that's completely devoid of nutritional value. And then after that, how are they going to get rid of all this horrible genetically modified food and replant the good food that they want to eat? Well, in my opinion, what's going to happen, what they think is going to happen is they have another chemical which actually does kill these GMOs. They will spray that chemical on the existing crops, which are all these horrible genetically modified nutrition-free foods. They'll kill all those, and then they'll pull out their seeds from the seed bank after cleaning up, or maybe they'll do it in greenhouses. They could probably do it in greenhouses because with only 500 million people on the planet, they probably don't need entire continents filled with rice fields and soybeans and corn. They could probably just do it on greenhouses until nature takes its course and cleans everything up. So they could take the seeds out of this storage silo in Norway, what's that thing called, the Spitsbergen, or anyway, they got this big, huge, it is the global seed fault in Syalbard near Spitsbergen in Longyearbyen, about 801 miles from the North Pole. The reason they put it there is because it's really super cold, like 40 degrees below zero. I think that's Fahrenheit. Yeah. And so they don't have to...
buried it in permafrost. It's a gigantic freezer.
Right, and it's above sea level, and it's above any projected sea level, which might occur if there is global warming and the sea level rises. And it's like bomb-proof and everything else proof, radiation-proof, and all this stuff. So the bottom line is they've got these good seeds stored away. They're contaminating the entire globe with GMOs, which, you know what I think these chemtrails could be? You know those planes that spew out chemicals all over the planet? You look up in the sky and you see these trails behind planes that should have been vaporized hours ago, and they're still kind of lingering. Well, those are probably pesticides designed to kill normal crops. So that, you know, your average Joe gardener in his backyard sitting there looking at his withering tomato plant going, why is my tomato plant dying and the big, huge cornfield down the road's thriving? You know, it could be possibly because they're spewing out all these herbicides with, you know, in the chemtrails overhead and attempt to kill out all the good food so that they can achieve their New World Order agenda, which is stated on the Georgia Guidestones, to reduce the population to a sustainable 500 million people. Oh, by the way, the Georgia Guidestones was actually created in 1979 by a guy that went under a pseudonym of R.H. Christian, ironically.
You know, one thing, you asked the question, how are they going to bring this about? And, you know, I've noticed a change in people. Well, ever since I was a little kid, they've been pushing fluoride, wanting to put fluoride in the water because it's this wonderful stuff and you know, makes your teeth strong. And in researching the Codex, that is one of the only drugs that was automatically approved. And they mentioned that fluoride was invented by the Nazis because they found out that by giving people fluoride, it made them complacent, suggestible, and easy to control.
Do you remember me telling you about the physicist who was able to demonstrate that your thoughts can change the molecular structure of crystalline ice? Okay, there's this physicist from Japan who demonstrated that when he labeled glasses of water, he used words like love, peace, joy, and hope, and then he used words like hate, murder, sloth, gluttony, and he put Hitler's name on one, and he taped a cell phone to another one, and froze that water. And what he found was the crystalline structure of the water, the glasses that have the positive thoughts, was all beautiful and harmonious-looking, snowflake-looking crystals. And then the crystals from the water with the glasses that were labeled negative thoughts were all ugly, amorphous, globular, didn't even look like crystals. So the point is that our thoughts, our intentions, have a physical effect on reality. And so what I'm getting at is I think it's possible that even if they do bombard us with all these horrible toxic foods or nutrient-free foods, you can actually change that with prayer. Like, you know how it's been tradition in Christian families to pray before a meal? I think that right now it's probably going to be more important than ever to pray before a meal. Because God is all-powerful. He can do anything he wants. It doesn't matter what they do to your food. If God wants to make your food good, he will.
Amen. And, you know, God's word is our strength, and that's why he tells us in Philippians that if there's anything pure, anything lovely, anything noteworthy, anything that's a good report, you dwell on these things. And it's in Proverbs. It says a merry heart works as a medicine. And by merry heart, if your source is the Word of God, which is the only absolute thing in the universe, I know non-Christians don't want to hear that, but you're married because you have this trust. With God, nothing's impossible, and you're not walking around worried about what you eat. Like you said, I heard one preacher said, I don't pray at meals because I'm religious. I pray because I have to eat this stuff, and I want to live. And I agree. I pray because I thank the Lord that He keeps us safe.
Amen. Hey, with that note, we are going to take a little quick break. We're going to listen to your song. What's the name of that song again?
This one is Walking in the Sun.
Walking in the Sun. We're going to listen to Walking in the Sun for about 3 minutes. And after the song, we will be back. If you want to listen to us after hours, we'll be back in about 3 minutes.
I think, who is this for? And I pray, Lord, not my will, but thine be done. I'm never on my own, if we truly are as one. And there's no mountain too high, no road too rough, no desert too dry, no trial too tough. Your word, when it fills me, tells the mountains, move. Your peace, when it steals my heart, makes all my roads smooth. And the deserts are watered by fountains of love. All my needs are met in Christ, there's always enough. So I go one step, two steps, three steps to know. Each step is right when you walk the King's road. And go following the promise of the promise. Never in the darkness when you're walking in the sun. Oh, you're walking in the sun. I'm following a light that my eyes can't see. It's the truth of your word that illuminates me. I'm following a path that you already walked for me. So it's one step, two steps, three steps to go. Hope lighting my way and love easing my load. Took a mountain too high, no road too rough, no desert too dry, no trial too tough. I keep following the promise of the promised one. No fear of the darkness while I'm walking in the sun. I'm walking in the sun. I'm walking with the sun.
Welcome back to Vision for Humanity Radio. This is Samuel David Moore and Tim Williams, and you were just listening to Walking in the Sun, performed by Tim Williams on all sorts of instruments, and Monica Timmerman. Hey, Tim, do you want to shout out your web address in case somebody wants to go buy that album?
Sure. Got quite a few things on. It's timwilliams.bandcamp.com, and love to hear from you on there. My email's on there, and you can listen to several projects that I've done with several different people, good Christian folks. Got one young rapper that's pretty good. So go on by and say hi.
Awesome. Well, we were just talking about before the little intermission about the intention has a physical effect on our environment. I have learned recently that not only does our intention have an effect on water, but genes, they took a little beaker and filled it with chromosomes or genes, genetic material, strands of DNA. And they took another beaker and put it adjacent to the first beaker. But in the second beaker, they did not put any genetic material. And they let some time pass, and before long, the beaker without any genetic material in it all of a sudden had genetic material identical to that in the first beaker. I think the point I'm trying to make is that in spite of the fact that the evil powers that be are trying to feed us toxic food with bad genes, we have the ability somehow to change that without even really knowing it through prayer. That's my
Amen.
That's what I strongly believe.
I believe it too. I was talking to somebody the other day, and it hit my mind. It you know, it's kind of a humorism, but my DNA from God is DNA, dunamos, pneumos, agape, the power of the Spirit of His love. So, you know, I even, this is a little off the subject, but I kind of drive doctors crazy because, you know, how when you go in and you have to fill out a doctor form and they want all your family history of all your diseases and stuff, I always put that my older brother had every disease that ever existed. He died, but he's much better now, and he's living with my father, and they're both eternal. The subjects we covered tonight, okay, there's, I think you said the population target was 5% of what it is now. So that 5%, these are people controlling it, obviously. There's a group going for that, and these are 5% that think they're, obviously must believe they're superior in some way. I mean, we're talking about Hitler kind of thinking, you know, the Bible's written on the principle of love and love your neighbor and brotherly love. That whole concept is, it's all about me, and I don't really need you. You know, I've got a couple of people I can rely on until I don't need them. Can you imagine what that 5% population would be like that are willing to get rid of the 95%? You know, it's the old criminal, you know, the pirate gold thing where, you know, 10 pirates go out and they get a bunch of gold, and by the time they get it buried, there's only 2 left, and they're eyeballing each other, you know, with drawn swords because they want it all.
Yeah, and then so the one that kills the other one, and then he decides he wants to go do something, and there's like nobody to play tennis with. One reason how I am confident that their global agenda of decreasing the population to 500 million people, you know how I know that will never happen? Because in the Bible, it talks about killing a third of the people, not 95%. Right. Yeah, I think the vast majority of that 30% of the people are going to be those same people who are propagating all this stuff. And even if you don't believe in Christ, even if you just believe in karma or something, that makes sense too. I mean, these people are out there sowing these bad seeds, and their bad seeds are gonna somehow come right back around and bite them in the butt.
Yep. You know, all those principles go to a Bible principle. You reap what you sow.
Exactly. I think I want to play David Habib Bardowell's song, God is Everything, because that's a nice song we haven't heard of for a while. And because I think we've pretty much covered what we need to cover in this topic, that there's a global agenda to destroy the food supply, and if you pray over your food and pray to God and accept Christ as your Savior, you can combat all that stuff, and you won't have to worry about it. And one of the main messages I like to get across is that you need to keep positive and keep faith in God and exude love and caring, understanding, patience, tolerance, honesty, charity, and try to keep your heart in a good spirit and not focus on all the bad stuff. Anyway, so that's it for tonight's show. Thanks for same song. And his website, if you want to buy the song, is thegateoc.com.
God is love, God is life, God is everything. Strength and joy, hope and peace found in Him. God, you are love, you are life, you are everything. Please make your precious home in me. God is love, God is life, God is everything. Strength and joy, hope and peace found in Him. God, you are love, you are life, you are everything. Please make your precious home in me. When I am weak, you are strong, you're the tree life comes from. You're the owner of my soul, now my heart's an open door. Forever be the Lord of my life. God is love, God is life, God is everything. Strength and joy, hope and peace found in Him. God, you are love, you are life, you are everything. Please make your precious home in me. When I am weak, you are strong, you're the tree life comes from. You're the owner of my soul, now my heart's an open door. Forever be the Lord of my life. God is love, God is love, God is life, God is everything. Oh yeah. Strength and joy, hope and peace found in Him. Found in Him. God, you are love, you are life, you are everything. You are everything. Please make your precious home in me. Oh yes, Lord. Please make your precious home in me. 'Cause you are everything. Please make your precious home in me.